Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio.
Happy Friday. I am Tracy V. Wilson.
And I'm Holly Fry.
One of our episodes this week was about Jón Arason and the Protestant Reformation coming to Iceland.
Yeah.
We tried very hard to say all of the Icelandic things correctly.
I'm so bad at Icelandic.
Yeah, it's a challenging language. There are some phonemes in Icelandic that just aren't in English.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes it very hard to try to learn to say things correctly as an adult. That's the case with other languages too. It's not unique to Icelandic.
Icelandic does have a reputation for being very hard to learn.
Yeah. And there's just some of the words, because of the way the language works, some of the words are very long. And so it will be a long word that has multiple parts in it that aren't really sounds that really exist in English.
And that is why I can never move permanently to Iceland. Because you have to learn the language to get citizenship.
Yep.
And I think I would be on the struggle bus with that.
Yeah. I think I would have a challenge of the long dark winters because just living in Massachusetts, where the nights in winter are longer and it gets dark earlier than anywhere else that I've ever lived, it's rough. And I am totally aware that this is not the earliest sunset in the world or the longest night in the world, but just even the difference between Atlanta, Georgia, and Eastern Massachusetts.
Yeah.
It's difficult. So normally when I'm writing episodes, the way I generally approach people's names is when we are talking about children, I'm using their first names.
Yeah.
Because it just feels a little weird to me to just refer to a child with only their last name.
Right.
And then usually that person becomes an adult over the course of the episode. And at that point in the episode writing, I am usually referring to them by their last name in a lot of cases, unless it's going to be confusing. I did not do this in this episode because of how names work in Iceland.
Right.
Because like Jón Arason's son was Bjorn Jónsson. And, Bjorn Jonsson's son would have been something Bjornsson probably. And it just felt very weird to me to spend the whole time calling a man named Jón by the name of his father as his father's son. So I felt a little weird. So if you noticed that seemed a little different from a lot of our episodes, that's why. Also, I've been to two of the places we talked about in this episode. One of them we went to on our trip. We stopped at Skálholt.
Yeah.
I think that was on...
We stopped at Althing also, right?
Oh, sure. Yes. Well, the Althing. Yes, for sure. We were at Thingvellir, the assembly fields, where the Althing historically met. I forgot about that one. Yes, we went there. We walked all through there. But in terms of the other places, we stopped at Skálholt on our trip. And I think that was the day that we were supposed to go snowmobiling, but we didn't get to go snowmobiling because the glacier was too melty.
It was too warm for snowmobiles.
Yeah. So we had other stops that we made on that day.
Horsies.
We got to feed some Icelandic horses. With what their, the farm where they lived on described as horse candy, which is very charming. You could buy some horse candy and feed the horses. There was a very stern sign saying that the horses were allowed to eat their horse candy and nothing else.
Yeah.
So if you go to whatever horse farm this was, don't try to feed the horses your random apple or whatever.
No.
Only horse candy. So we stopped at this place. We saw the church that's there now. There was a little museum in the church with kind of an honor system, pay to be able to go in there. And then
there was the murder barn.
Oh, yeah, the murder. Yeah, you talk about that part.
I'm trying to remember all the details because I will admit that my own activities in the murder barn were probably different than most other people's.
Well, and I
Because-
spent more time in the little museum part, so I didn't see as much of this.
Yeah, the murder barn was just a little barn where a murder has occurred
Okay.
at one point. But my dear friend Bernadette, who was with us on this trip, and I decided this is terrible, and I hope nobody who is Icelandic or lives there thinks this is terribly disrespectful. But we decided that we would stage out photographs that look like the end of Midsummer. Just if you've seen that movie, you know what we're talking about. And if you haven't, then you don't. But
I missed all of this completely.
Yeah, we were giggling because that's a movie we have watched together and have fond memories of. It's not a fun movie, but it's very good.
Yeah.
But yes, there's a thing that happens in a similar structure at the end of that movie that is very upsetting.
Oh.
And we thought it would be fun to reenact it.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Listen. That was an idyllic little place, though.
Yeah.
Super
I mean, a lot.
pretty.
I felt that way a lot about a lot of the places we stopped.
I mean, I'm so obsessed with Iceland. It's not even funny.
I'm also not sure if that was a place that was a planned stop for the day because I don't really remember. Our schedule that day changed so much because of the canceling of the snowmobiling.
I think that was a last minute addition because our schedule had opened up.
Yeah. This one of the things that our God was really great about was planning in advance where our bathroom stops were going to be.
Bless that man.
Which, I mean, it's necessary if you're in Iceland with a group of people because you're probably going to be traveling distances without necessarily a place in between them to stop.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember if that had been an on the schedule from the beginning planned bathroom stop at the end of the day. But I do remember, I think I remember there also being a bathroom there.
There was. It was a little pay one in the
an honor system app for paying to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, like shout out to God for that, by the way, because not only would he plan frequent stops, but whenever we got on the bus, he would say, the next bathroom is 90 minutes away, and also seatbelts, please. But like that way you knew, okay, I can drink my soda because we're going to have a stop at this point in time.
Yeah.
Or like maybe I should lay off on the coffee because this one's a longer wait. Like you don't think about how important and helpful that kind of planning is until you have someone doing it and you're like, this trip felt so much more relaxed and easy because I never had to worry.
There has been more bathroom angst at all of our other trips to Europe when we typically did not have an advanced time planned for when we would be making that stop. So my first trip to Iceland on my honeymoon, we stayed overnight, at least one night, possibly 2 nights in Leugervatn, which is a place that we only drove through when we were there in November. And where it's not a big place, but where we were was right by that pool that we talked about in the episode. And so we had just walking around, kind of discovered this little pool, took pictures of it, took pictures of those stones, took a picture of the explanatory sign, the English language portion of it. And so when I was writing this episode, I was like, I definitely have been to that pool. And I definitely remember reading something on the sign about something historically significant. And so I had to go through my honeymoon pictures and find my picture of the sign to refer back to it. Last random thing that I had on my list of things to talk about is Jon Arisson's poetry. I've read none of it. I don't know if there are translations of it into English outside of the context of like isolated things in academic papers. But you know, this poetry doesn't still exist. It still exists in Icelandic. I read descriptions of people like describing how it's worked as poetry and the kind of the forms that it uses. And it was far enough for my experience reading English poetry that I was like, I don't even really understand this. But there was a paper in which somebody named W.P. Kerr, who was the vice president of the Viking Society for Northern Research, this paper came out in 1914. He described Jon Aresson's poetry as something that cannot be explained except to those who understand it already.
It's kind of like, if you don't get it, don't bother.
Yeah, don't even try. So anyway, I am very glad. I'm very glad that we had God as our guide on that trip. He was great. He was amazing.
What a delight.
Knew so much stuff. And had he not told me or told the whole group, had he not told us that story, I would not have had this episode to talk about, or I would not have had this idea to talk about on an episode. So thank you for all of your many things that you did for our group on our trip, and also telling me that.
He was an absolute delight. Love God. I love that he will ping me on WhatsApp with Star Wars things when he sees them now. He's the best.
Yeah. He also sent some pictures of
New
Iceland's New Year celebration.
It was beautiful.
It's great.
I got to figure out when I'm going back, because I am going back. I just don't know when yet.
I really love Iceland. I love visiting Iceland. I have now been at 2 similar but different times of year, because the first time that I went was for our honeymoon. We were there late April, early May, which was a little earlier than like the high season of tourist stuff. And we were there this time in November, which is a little later than the high season of the tourist stuff.
Yeah.
A little less advantageous for weather in both cases. I can't remember if I said this already. My absolute number one favorite purchase of what I bought for myself before our trip to Iceland last November was rain pants. Best choice of things to pack and have with me. I felt 1,000,000% more comfortable with my rain pants on than I had felt, however many years prior in the wind and the rain, wearing, in most cases, blue jeans with a pair of tights underneath, because I only had one pair of flannel-lined blue jeans, and I wound up making myself some long johns out of tights that I wasn't going to wear again as tights on the trip.
Yeah.
So anyway.
My previous trip was at the end of May. It was beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's after our honeymoon, Patrick and I had this conversation of, okay, we want to go back. Do we want to go back during Northern Lights season, try to see the Northern Lights, or do we want to go back like in the height of summer?
Well, and you never know, because I was there at the end of May and it was a freak year when you could still see the Northern Lights. So and we couldn't see them this trip when it was supposed to be ideal time.
Right. When we were there late April, early May, we stayed at a hotel that has a wake-up service. You can put your name on a list. And they had the name list out when we checked in. And I was like, I know there's not much of a chance of this really happening, but I'm going to put our name on it. And the person at the front desk said, actually, they were out last night quite bright. And we didn't have the list out because, from our perspective, the season for the Northern Lights is over. Like, it was at the time of the year where it's not fully dark at any point at night.
Right.
But she was like, yeah, the Northern Lights were out last night, and we didn't have the list out, and people were really upset. And where Patrick and I had been the night before, it was really overcast, so we would not have been able to see them. But anyway, Iceland, love it.
Iceland, you're the best.
Occasional history episodes with multiple beheadings. Love those too, for a different reason.
We talked about the Isles of Scilly this week. And the 335 Years' War.
Yeah.
The Isles of Scilly are officially on my tourism bucket list now.
Right.
Because they look beautiful.
Yes.
And I knew precious little about them before we did this. I had seen this particular story in blurb form.
Right, me too.
On a number of occasions. But actually looking at it, I'm like, oh, I see.
Yeah.
This is a lot of people making decisions that are bad and that nobody wants. Look at that. Look how that goes.
Sometimes when I'm trying to find something kind of ridiculous to talk about on the show, I mean, sometimes we need some humor. in the episodes, and so I'll wind up Googling something like most ridiculous wars, and this is one that has wound up, on several.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, so yeah, it's a basic setup that had crossed my screen a number of times in the past, but I had no concept of the full context for it.
Right. One guy who just wants his way really caused a lot of problems. I love the idea of paying for things with daffodils.
I like that better
Than
than
puffins,
paying
because the
for them with
puffins were
puffins.
gonna end up on a plate.
Yeah.
It's fun to think about, like, here's your herd of puffins.
Yeah.
That's inherently funny, but then,
Yeah. When I was in Iceland, years ago on my honeymoon, I got to hold a rescue puffin at an aquarium. It was a puffin who could not live in the wild anymore.
Yeah.
Was being cared for at the aquarium. And was so soft.
Yeah.
That as a person who does eat some meat, I was like, I could never eat one of these. It captured my heart to touch this incredibly soft puffin.
If you ever meet a cow, you might be doomed.
Oh, I've met cows before.
Yeah, me too. They're so sweet.
Somehow the fact that like I grew up around cows and my grandfather had cows and would gift the family with a side of beef at Christmas. Like that feels a little different than this puffin who I met for the first time as a grown adult.
Right. Yeah, I mean, some of it is just, like, culturally what you were accustomed to.
Yeah.
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 Puffins. They're so cute and goofy. I love them. Yeah, I'm so struck in this one by the ways that conflicts wage on and do really kind of come down to, disagreements that often it's particularly in this case, right? Like Parliament going, "No, dude, you can't have
You
money for
can't do
that.
that.
No, dude, you really can't. Sorry, dude, you can't do that." Him going, "I'm gonna do it anyway." He totally kinda Leroy Jenkins his way into a big
Uh-huh.
scandal that impacted a lot of people.
Yeah.
Um,
That is something that has come up on the show before in the context of other episodes, and I went because I was trying to remember, like, I remember we have talked about the basics of this context before, and in my looking through old outlines, could not put my finger on which episodes those were.
yeah, but I like it, and I like the fact that, someone figured out that this was still a hanging Chad, essentially.
Yeah.
Like, how can we fix this in a way that looks great for all of us and is actually pretty lighthearted and fun? I love that. Paperwork, it'll get you every time. File your TPS reports,
Mhm.
or someone will have to realize you're at war. Some of this, obviously, as we talk about the English Civil Wars, those have been things that for me have always been a little difficult to get my head around because there are so many moving
Uh-huh.
parts. And because this was a time when I had to kind of distill that down into like easier broad strokes,
Right.
I suddenly was like, "Oh, now I get it. Now I see. That other thing we've talked about." It was one of those great moments where we talk about this. I know we've talked about this during live shows for sure. Like, the longer we do this show, the greater puzzle that is world history gets filled in a little
Yeah.
each time.
Yeah.
And, this was one of those where a lot of pieces clicked together and some weird shape thing I thought I would never find went bloop, and I was like, "Oh,
It's right there.
alrighty, Roo, now I get it. Now I get it. Now listen, don't quiz me on it because in 2 weeks I'll be like, I don't remember. I don't know what happened there." But
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
it will be retained. I don't want anybody to be at war because 'cause I'm a hippie, but that's how it is, and it
Same
doesn't nobody
here.
wants to listen to me, apparently. Um, yeah, 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 let's go to the Isles of Scilly at some point. It's on my list. Next time I go to England, I'm gonna have to figure out a little off the coast visit
Uh-huh.
because I wanna go. I wanna see all the little things. I also just love, like, those little places that are, uh don't have a huge population and have a tourism industry that is a cajillion times. I know that's not mathematically real.
Right.
But it's Iceland is not dissimilar.
Yeah.
Because, it has, I think at last count, what we were told when we were there a couple months ago, 400,000 people now, which is actually up quite a bit from what it was not that long ago. But they do more than 2 million people a year in tourism, which is a
Right.
lot.
Yeah.
And so this is a bigger gap in terms of proportion. Because if there are 1,800 people and 100,000 people are coming a year, that's
Right.
a bigger jump.
That made me think about Western North Carolina, which is a big tourist destination, Asheville specifically, and a lot of the other cities and towns in the area, tourist destinations. And after, in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Helene, there was a lot of discourse from people saying we should move away from tourism. We were so reliant on tourism dollars, and now we've had this disaster. And it was one of those things where I was like, I get that sentiment, but also that disaster is so enormous that every industry that could be there would also be affected.
Yeah.
And so that just made me think about, we're talking about islands in a climate that's milder than, some other parts of of that area of the world, but how vulnerable islands are to disaster and then what happens afterward. This is where my brain is today, apparently. Disaster and consequences of disaster.
I feel like my brain is living there lately. But hopefully, if this is your weekend coming up, I hope you have no disasters, nor any concerns about consequences of disasters, real or imagined. Listen, some days anxiety drives the bus, and you think about all this bad stuff that could happen. And I hope that doesn't happen for you this weekend. I hope instead you have joy, some relaxation, you take care of the people around you, and they take care of you in turn. If you have to work, I hope it goes smoothly and no one's a jerk. And if they are a jerk, you tell them I said stop. I'm sure they're really gonna care. When you're like, Holly Fry said don't, they'll be like, and. So, in any case, we will be right back here tomorrow to share a classic story with you. And then on Monday, we'll have something brand new.
Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.